All right. Well, welcome everyone. Whether you're joining us here live or viewing this as a recording at a later date, we're really happy to have you. My name's Naomi Hoffer, and I am the program manager for the Sheri Sobrato Brisson Brain Cancer Survivorship Program. Alexa Greenstein is also a member of our survivorship team and with us here in the Zoom background, and you might see some posts in the chat box from Alexa. This webinar is part of our regular Living Well with Brain Cancer webinar series, which is one aspect of our growing survivorship program in the UCSF Neuro-Oncology Clinic, made possible through a generous donation from Sheri Sobrato Brisson. Our mission is to enhance the wellness and quality of life of patients with brain tumors through programs that support emotional, cognitive, and physical health. We have partnered with our amazing survivor community to develop these programs, and our survivors continue to be a vital component to our ongoing program offerings. So today's topic is on how to support our health by recognizing and lessening the negative impact that environmental toxins can have on our daily life. We will start by talking about what we mean by environmental toxins and how they can negatively impact our health in various ways. And then we'll learn some helpful strategies and simple swaps to minimize our toxic load as our presenter takes us room by room through our living environment. We'll also be hearing about some helpful resources and websites to support us in getting started right away. And we will hopefully have some time at the end for your questions as well as throughout. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function on your Zoom platform. And finally, you will have a chance to share your experiences and best practices with one another in our unrecorded after the show segment. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our key presenter for this evening's webinar. Karen Wang is an expert science educator with deep knowledge in environmental health, data analysis, and research methodology. She is the former director of the Collaborative on Health and the Environment at Commonweal and the founder of Because Health, an environmental health website and social media campaign. She is currently an independent consultant with the Center for Environmental Health, a nonprofit in Oakland. Karen has a PhD in applied economics from the University of Washington and also holds a Master's of Science in Earth Systems and a BA in economics from Stanford University. Dr. Wang, on behalf of all of us here, I want to thank you so much for offering your time and expertise on a topic that will support our health in so many ways. And I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Hello. Thank you so much. Let me just start sharing. Okay, great. Here we go. So can everyone see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Karen Wang, as Naomi mentioned, and welcome to today's webinar on non-toxic tips for healthy living. Thank you to Naomi Hoffer and UCSF for inviting me to speak with you all today. And I'm looking forward to meeting some of you afterwards. So as Naomi mentioned, the field of public health that I work in is called environmental health. When we talk about the environment, we're not just talking about, the polar ice caps and wilderness and national parks, but we really are talking about where we live, work, play. The environment is all around us. And many times people, when they think about health, they think about personal choices like eating fruits and vegetables and exercising. But the environment and the way we shape our environment can actually help. It can help shape the kinds of choices you make and actually sometimes make them. So this encompasses things like air, water, and soil pollution, toxics and hazardous substances, and how our homes, our communities are built, workplaces, public health infrastructure, and then, of course, global issues like climate change also impact health. And today we're focusing primarily on the toxics portion of this environmental health and how to limit toxic chemicals and substances that you and your families are exposed to. And we're focus specifically on toxics and cancers. We will be mentioning a couple of things like indoor air quality, water, things like that as well. So as Naomi mentioned, my name is Karen Wang. I'm currently a science education consultant for the nonprofit Center for Environmental Health in Oakland. I'm the former director for almost 5 years of the nonprofit, the Collaborative on Health and the Environment. I'm the founder and editor of Because Health, which is a website that tries to take a lot of the environmental health science and put it in more simple mainstream language. And I have a master's in environmental science and a PhD in applied economics. And I'm super passionate about environment and health. I also do healthy building consulting and help people on residential projects as well. And the way I got into environmental health was around the time when I was trying to get pregnant with my kids and going through some health issues of my own. So it is also very personal to me. And my 2 kids are, the reason that I work in this area. So the plan for today is we're going to go very quickly through some environmental risks and health, and specifically, focus on toxics. And we'll mention 5 different types of chemicals of concern that have specifically been linked to cancers. And then we will spend the bulk of our time talking about how to limit your exposures. And I'm using kind of a house because, as you all know, and especially during COVID, we spend the majority of our lives at home now. And so we'll go room by room through the kitchen, your cleaning and laundry closet, bedroom, living room, bathroom, and then a bit around the house as well. And talk about some simple changes that you can make in those areas. And throughout today's presentation, I will be pausing, I'll look in the Q&A in the chat. So please enter your questions there. And if there's something that I think might be better for the final Q&A, I'll leave it until then. Okay, so let's start. So as I mentioned, people very often talk about lifestyle, right? So we hear about tobacco, diet, nutrition, now some infectious diseases, radiation, alcohol, UV light. And people think a lot about genetics and how it influences health. And I'd say that is, what you see here is the majority of kind of the public conversation about what leads to health, human health. But as we know, there are, escalating rates of a lot of chronic conditions, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease, reproductive health, impairment, that cannot be just ascribed to genetics and lifestyle and nutrition. In fact, there is very good scientific evidence that environmental exposures, so this third green circle you see here, such as pollutants in air, water, and food, and occupational exposures, contribute to disease risk. And it's estimated about 20% is genetics and the rest is lifestyle and environment. And the WHO estimates that about 12.6 million deaths globally, or 23% were attributable to the environment. So pollution, radiation, built environment, occupational risk, climate change, et cetera. And there have been some estimates that about 2/3 of cancer cases are also linked to some environmental causes as well. This is a chart here showing national trends and rates of new cancer cases. You'll see some have declined and some are increasing. Researchers are talking about the environmental exposures and how they're associated with some cancer incidences. Specifically looking at some things like cancer, lung cancer in never smokers. And there is also some evidence showing that environmental contributors can impact prognosis and survival as well. There have been some studies looking at BPA and increases of aggressiveness of breast cancer tumors, reduced survival with air pollution for lung cancer. I think that the science is evolving, but what we're seeing early is that there are some impacts. So what chemicals or substances are we talking about? So in this presentation today, I'm not going to deep dive into every single one and give you a long explanation of what they are, because we're focusing more on the tips for how to avoid exposure or to, limit the amount that you come into contact with. I do have a bunch of resources if any of you would like to find out more about them. I would be happy to share them. So we're going to be mainly talking about how to limit our exposures to some things that you might have heard of, like lead and mercury. That falls under the heavy metals. Heavy metals. BPA, which is something that maybe you guys have heard of, is a type of bisphenol. PFAS has recently been getting a lot of news because they're known as forever chemicals. And you may have heard of them because Teflon is one. But I do want to emphasize that, in each bubble, for instance, bisphenols, there are many bisphenols apart from BPA. BPA is just one of them. Same with PFAS, the chemical that Teflon is. There are many that are very similar. And what we commonly find is that many times they may manufacturers may switch one out for another one. So we'll be, we're not deep diving into all of these, but we will be talking about how to avoid them. Okay. So, I think that many times, when I talk to people about these kind of things, it can seem really intimidating and scary. There's a lot, and, how do we change everything? But I do like to remind people that the science has shown that individual actions that we're going to be talking about, dusting, vacuuming, washing your hands, changing out some personal care products, can make a difference. So they kind of go in, they either check people's urine or blood, and they make changes, and then they show that actually, there are things that do make a difference. And much of that is because many chemicals that we are talking about today, like BPA and phthalates, they leave your body in about 2 to 3 days. So let's say you are exposed somehow through a food you ate or something that you touched and that absorbed into your skin. Well, in about 48 hours, it'll be gone. So, one-off exposures are not really, not as big of a deal. Like, your body can process these chemicals and excrete them in most cases. But what happens is that many of us are exposed day after day, many times a day, to things like BPA and phthalates. And that is what happens. And that is when it can lead to health effects. Okay, so before we move on, let me just check the Q&A and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. Don't see anything, so I'm going to continue. Okay, so our plan for today, now we're going to talk more about how to limit exposures room to room. And this is a little house graphic that I found, and we're going to start off in the kitchen. The reason we're going to start off in the kitchen is because I think it's pretty obvious. We eat and drink water throughout the day, and those things are directly entering our body. So I like to start there because generally changes that you make that are, in the kitchen, can have a higher impact in terms of health. Then we're going to be talking about the cleaning closet and laundry. And the reason I'm going there is because, people in many cases, are knowingly bringing in toxic chemicals into their home through different cleaning products and laundry products. In fact, many cleaning products have warnings on them. And so we're going to be talking about some simple swaps that you can do to sort of reduce the amount of toxic chemicals that you're, willingly bringing into your home through the cleaning closet. Then we're going to be talking about the bedroom and living room because these are places where people spend a lot of time. And even more so during COVID. Then we'll be talking about the bathroom. And then we'll be limitedly talking a little bit about outside, either directly right around the home or, in your neighborhood or in community. Okay, so this is a plan. And after each room, I will stop and look at the Q&A and make sure that I'm not missing anything. I will look after we finish the couple of kitchen slides. So when we talk about limiting exposures through the kitchen, through food and water, there's 4 kind of main categories that I like to think of. Food, the actual food and ingredients itself. And then secondly, food contact, anything that kind of touches your food. All the way from, when it left the field or the processing plant all the way to your home, whatever it's packaged in, whatever you cook it in, however you prep it, what you eat it in. Okay. So anything that touches the food. Then we're going to be talking about food and water and beverages. And then a couple of other things around the kitchen, kind of my other category. So, what happened here? Okay. So food, that's the first category. And this is, we're talking about the actual food that you are eating. One of the first tips is to eat organic when you can, recognizing that organic may not be affordable for everyone in everything. My trick for prioritizing, especially produce, is leafy berry skins. So leafy are things like kale, lettuces, spinach, things like that. Leafy, things you eat the leaves of. Berries are things like strawberries, blackberries, blueberries. And skins are things that you actually eat the skin of, and it's not a thick kind of barrier. So for example, pears, apples, things like that. Whereas other fruits and vegetables where there's a thick skin, like an avocado, something like that, tend to have less pesticide residues. Environmental Working Group every year publishes kind of their top 12 fruits and vegetables that have higher pesticide residues. Generally, this leafy berry skins covers it. So, if you don't want to look up the 12 when you're in the grocery store, just think of leaves, berries, and skins. For non-organic produce, this has been shown in a paper to actually reduce the amount of pesticide residues, which is creating a solution of baking soda in water and letting the produce soak for about 15 minutes and then rinsing it off. It won't get everything, but it will reduce the amount of pesticides. You don't need to buy any sort of fancy washes or anything like that. This is the one that's been shown to be the most effective for pesticide residues. Another tip about food is to eat less processed food. And you'll probably hear that from if there was a nutritionist giving a talk. But the reason why, from an environmental health perspective, it's good to eat less processed food is because there are food additives, preservatives, and processed foods tend to come with a lot more food packaging. And in the processing process itself, whether or not that's on a conveyor belt or with gloves or different tubes, the food is coming into contact with just a lot more things that may leach chemicals into the food. So eating less processed food is always a good idea. and for these reasons. Along with that, I specifically called out limiting canned foods and foods wrapped in kind of lots of plastic. Many times I like to emphasize that cartons and frozen bags are healthier than canned. Frozen produce also tends to be a really great way to buy organic on a budget. Berries, you can buy cauliflower, beans, all sorts of things like that in the frozen aisle. So I like to do that a lot. Bulk bins are a great resource as well for reducing the amount of food that you buy that's packaged. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about food contact. We kind of touched on that on the processed food, but if you think about just in your home itself, your food does come into contact with a lot of materials. So the number one general rule is to kind of avoid as much as possible plastic around food and water. And specifically when a food is very acidic, fatty, or when it's heated, or when containers get a lot of heat and UV light, it basically kind of the acid and fat make it more likely that the food will leach more chemicals from the plastic. And the heat and UV kind of make the plastic a little bit more damaged, I guess, in a way, so that it will leach more chemicals into the food. So, things like, tomato sauces that are really acidic. Or when you take a plastic container and you put it in your dishwasher, the dishwasher gets really, really, really hot. And they have shown that, over time, that plastic kind of breaks down. And when you put food into it, it leaches more chemicals into the food after it's been heated and cooled down so many times. Same thing if you kind of leave these plastic containers outside in the sunlight. So, because of that, it's recommended to store leftovers and, pack your food in glass, stainless steel, ceramic. They have these cool beeswax wraps or silicone containers. And those are substances that do not leach as many chemicals or none at all into your food. So, it's quite easy to kind of find Pyrex, food storage containers with a plastic lid. Many times people ask me, is the plastic lid okay? Because most of the glass ones still have a plastic lid. And I'd say, yes, most of the time it's not even touching the food, so it's totally fine. And, generally they are made from a type of plastic that is a little bit safer. So yeah, get those glass food storage containers, even if they have a plastic top. So along with the tip on heat, do not heat food or drinks in plastic, and avoid eating hot foods in plastic dishes. So, if there's one thing that you could take away from this in the kitchen, it's if you have leftovers or you're doing a microwave dinner or something like that, just pop it onto a glass plate or ceramic plate and then put it in the microwave. So that would be my wish for you all. That's the number one thing, the easiest thing you could do in the kitchen. If you do have plastic Tupperware, you don't have to throw it away. You can learn to use it in ways that are safe. For instance, if you want to store crackers in it, that's probably totally fine. There's not a lot of liquid there, so there's, it's not easy for that to leach onto the dry goods. So you can store dry goods in plastic Tupperware, or in my house, I have plastic Tupperware kind of organizing all of my random drawers and craft supplies and kids stuff. So, use that plastic Tupperware for other purposes and kind of replace them with healthier options. Many times I do get asked, well, how about like my yogurt that comes in a, white tub from the grocery store? There are safer plastics. Generally, if you can look at the recycling code on the bottom, number 2, number 4, and number 5 are safer plastics. And that is, kind of what is used like milk jugs and, your yogurt containers and things like that. Continuing on from food storage, there's lots of other things that your food touches. So for instance, your pans. Oh, sorry, this got cut off a little bit. But I like to say invest in cast iron or carbon steel pans and ditch the non-stick coated pans. Do not be fooled if it says PFOA free and we still have a non-stick coating. It's in the same class of chemicals. You want to steer clear. There are now some new companies that make ceramic coated nonstick pans, and they are better than the traditional nonstick. However, my experience is that they don't last as long, and they quickly kind of lose their nonstick abilities. And when the ceramic starts coming up, you'll see what's underneath many times is aluminum, and we want to avoid aluminum in direct contact with food. So, for some people that I talk to, they absolutely have to have a nonstick pan. Maybe the cast iron pan is just way too heavy for them if they don't have. And so, yes, you can use a ceramic coated pan. They're better than the nonstick coating, but the healthiest option that is the most durable is cast iron or carbon steel pans. And I make eggs in them, scrambled eggs in them every morning, and they still work. So if you bake, the same thing goes. Avoid a lot of, muffin pans, loaf pans are actually coated in nonstick. It's better to use other materials, stainless steel, ceramic, glass. You can get a Pyrex loaf pan, silicone or aluminum. You can get an aluminum cookie sheet and put some parchment paper down over it. A lot of small kitchen appliances also have these nonstick coatings. You're able to find more and more versions that now use a ceramic nonstick coating. So like a waffle iron, things like that. They do make versions now with a ceramic coating. So you can look for those. Vintage cookware and dinnerware should also be avoided, except for cast iron. And you'll see here on the right, there's a vintage Pyrex. So back in the day, they used a lot of lead on those different paints or to get the colors. And so a lot of vintage cookware and dinnerware test very high for lead, and lead does leach into food. So, Pyrex, Corel, some of these brands have been heavily tested and shown to have high levels of lead. So I like to steer clear of that. So moving on from food contact, we're going to look at water and beverages. So it is recommended to use a water filter. You can look up the water quality reports for your public utilities. They should have on their website kind of a water quality report from the previous year. In some places like San Francisco, the water is, very clean, and you don't actually necessarily need to use a water filter. Many people like to use a water filter because it can kind of get rid of some of that chlorine-ish kind of taste. And then people are more apt to use tap water. It's except in certain cases where there's like very well-known examples of contamination of groundwater or lead pipes or things like that. Generally, we recommend using tap water over bottled water. And I can talk more about that if people have questions. If you're on a private well, which many people who are not on city systems are, it's very important to get your water quality tested. It's actually recommended that you get it tested yearly. Investing in stainless steel or glass water bottles is a way to limit the amount of plastic that comes into contact with water. There are some new studies now showing that if you're using a plastic water bottle or you buy bottled water that comes in plastic, that little micro bits of that plastic are actually like in the water, and you drink them and you're drinking these microplastics. The science isn't really far along enough to tell us whether or not these plastic particles that we're ingesting damage our health, but for many people, that information alone is enough to kind of make a change. And other beverages that are canned, beers, now we have coffees, sodas, things like that. All canned beverages are lined with BPA. There are no alternatives yet. And studies have shown that the most acidic and fatty beverages, so like, we're talking like coffees, like Mountain Dew, things like that, tend to kind of leach more of the BPA. Of course, it's like really hard to avoid these at all. So I would just say, like a good rule of thumb is to kind of limit the amount of canned beverages. Like it shouldn't be your only source of beverages. You should kind of mix it up. So, I myself drink, canned sparkling water, but, it's maybe one every couple of days. It's not like 3 or 4 a day. Another one that I put in here is to use Swiss water decaf for decaffeinated beverages like coffee, because the sort of one of the decaffeination methods uses a very strong, potent solvent, methylene chloride. So you can look for that. Usually on the decaf coffee, it will tell you the method it was to be decaffeinated. Oh, okay. And lastly, in the kitchen, 2 other important practices. Always wash your hands before eating snacks or meals. And of course, prepping. During COVID, we're all very used to washing our hands all the time for other reasons, for germs, things like that. But science has also shown that, when we're kind of in our homes, we're touching dust, we're touching different things, that our hands actually have, like particles, small particles that we can't see. Even if your hands look clean, they may not be actually really clean. There could be lead residues, pesticide residues, all sorts of things like that. And flame retardants, things like that. So if you wash your hands every time you eat, before you or prep food, even small snacks and meals, it will limit the amount of your exposure to toxic chemicals and substances. The second thing in the kitchen that I like to talk about is to always turn on the range hood or prop open a window when you cook. And that is because when you, and it's especially true if you have gas, when you turn on their stove, especially if it's gas and you're combusting, that in and of itself really raises levels of VOCs in your home kind of immediately. And so having that range hood on, even if you're doing something like boiling water, is really good for indoor air quality. Or open a window, get a fan going. Okay. So that concludes the portion on the kitchen. And I'm now going to look at the Q&A in the chat to see if I can. So somebody asked about using vinegar and salt to wash vegetables. Baking soda has been the one that has been scientifically shown to reduce pesticide residues. if you're looking for like dirt or, removing other things like that, sure. But if specifically here, we're talking about reducing pesticide residues. Okay, I have one here about water filters often come with plastic jugs. How about those? So I get this asked us a lot as well. Like if you're getting, let's say, a pure pitcher or something like that, yes, those plastics, probably do not, they're not benign plastics. The thing is that usually the water doesn't sit in there very long, right? And you're not usually, leaving that in the sun and you're not heating it up. In fact, many times they're kept in the fridge cold. So I'd say that, they're okay to use, given that you are, following the recommendations for replacing the filters so they don't develop other germs in them, and that you're using the water kind of regularly. And yes, I would not suggest that you put those jugs or those pitchers in the dishwasher itself. Many of those same water filtration companies also come with something that can go straight on your faucet. So if you want to avoid the plastic container, that's an easy thing to use as well. I have another question here. Is the microwave safe to use? To my knowledge, the microwave is safe to use, especially now if you have a newer microwave. There's just, they regulate that so that there's not like leaking radiation or microwave, waves from the microwave itself. If one thing that you can do is to not like put your face right up to it and wait for it. If you step back just a couple of feet, that's some extra assurance that you could use the microwave safely. Are there any safe nonstick pans? Yes. Like I mentioned, cast iron and carbon steel, if used properly, are very naturally nonstick. And you can use nonstick ceramic pans. How safe is glass or ceramics, considering they may be paint or on ceramics, lead in any of these? So yes, there is a concern with lead in ceramic glazes, specifically in ceramics that are imported to the United States. There have been found to be a lot of cases where there are high levels of lead in these types of ceramics. So I would say that the safest is to buy from kind of a reputable retailer in the United States. There are some brands that will, if you ask them, will say, or they'll say on their website that they are, lead free and things like that. So that is always a good thing to be aware of. Okay, if I'm baking chicken on a cookie sheet lined with aluminum foil for quick cleanup, is it safe, or should I use parchment paper now instead of foil? So it kind of depends. Like if there's a rack over the aluminum foil, then sure, go ahead. That's fine to use the foil. Generally it's especially with kind of acidic things like barbecue sauce, it is better not to have food in direct contact with aluminum foil. But it's also like if it's once in a while, it's probably not a big deal. If you're doing this weekly, yeah, I would try to look for an alternative. Okay, so let's move on to the cleaning closet and the laundry. So we are going to be talking about three things: cleaning itself, the practice of cleaning, cleaning products, and then I'm specifically going to talk about disinfectants because they have been such a topic of interest in the past couple of years. So we are going to talk about keeping your house clean. And I don't mean to sound like your mom here, but dust accumulates toxic chemicals, and scientists have shown that we inhale and ingest dust in our homes. This is especially true of like small children who are kind of on the floor, but even us adults do inhale and ingest dust. So one way to kind of reduce our exposure to toxic chemicals that accumulate dust is to vacuum often, preferably with a HEPA filter. That just means that the particles don't just like come into the vacuum and then leave out through the exhaust, but there's a filter there that kind of helps clean the air, or cleans the kind of air that's going back out through the vacuum. Wet, dust, and mop more often. So using a wet washcloth to kind of dust, using a mop with, we'll talk about a better cleaning solution, especially windowsills, floors, microfiber cloths, microfiber mops, things like that are really good for picking up dust. Okay, so, I like to say, like, if you're cleaning your home like once a month, like let's try for, 2 times a month. Whatever you're doing, try to just be aware that it's important, not just for these health reasons as well. Now let's talk about the cleaning product itself. So as I mentioned before, a lot of cleaning products have toxic substances in them. So there are thankfully more and more options for safer cleaning products and laundry detergents that still work. One label that you can look for is the EPA Safer Choice label. You'll see it on the bottom left here. Some companies that generally have good products that you can find easily at Safeway, Target, Whole Foods, Amazon, 7th Generation, Honest Company, and Ecos, they are widely available and have good options. If you're just shopping in the aisle, look for things that don't have a lot of fragrance. So you can see if something says fragrance free, that's probably already a better step in the right direction. I think many of us grew up with the idea that like something's got to smell really, really strong, and that's what means it's clean. And like, that's actually just not true. That's just a fragrance that has been added that companies have sort of like trained us to think, means clean, but it actually doesn't. Okay. So many of these healthier options, they kind of use either natural fragrances or come fragrance free. So you can also DIY some cleaners to save you money. If you have something like a liquid soap, like a Castile soap, or like a safer dish soap, vinegar, lemon, baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, you pretty much have everything you need to kind of clean different areas of the home. And I can, talk more about that, but one of my favorite ones is, a couple drops of a liquid soap in water and a spray bottle. That's an all-purpose cleaner. Half vinegar, white vinegar, half water. That's a really great, effective cleaner as well. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about disinfectants because people have been using them a lot in the past couple of years. And, as research has been showing, especially with, COVID, it's not shown that surfaces are a big source of transmission. But, if you are having like a stomach flu going on in your home or things like that, you might want to disinfect. So disinfect only when necessary. And they say to disinfect high touch surfaces. So by that, we mean things like doorknobs, light switches, counters, where like people's hands touch a lot. Okay. You don't need to disinfect your floor or your bed. There's lots of areas where just disinfectants are just not necessary. Here are some safer disinfectants that have safer active ingredients like hydrogen peroxide and citric acid. Many of the other disinfectants like bleach and quartz have been shown to have a lot of harmful asthma and other lung effects. These are 4 that you can find pretty easily. And these 4 are also on the EPA list for disinfecting COVID-19 virus as well. Please make sure to use proper protection. All of these products usually say use gloves, open windows, put eyeglass protection. And many of us don't do that, but you really should listen to what the label says. And you should also listen to what the label says for the proper amount of wet time. So if you really are trying to like stop the stomach flu from going around your house, many of these disinfectants will say it needs to stay wet for about 5 minutes before it will kill all the germs. So you need to, if you just spray it and then immediately wipe it, it's not going to work. So please follow the directions when it comes to disinfectants. So I will look again at the Q&A. Yeah, Force of Nature is a good disinfectant. However, if you look, especially like I know for the coronavirus, about a 10-minute wet time, which is quite long, and sometimes I think is a little impractical. Many of these other options are lower. They're like 1 to 2 minutes or up to 5 minutes. But yeah, Force of Nature, I think they're great too. Okay, I will move on. Okay, bedroom and living room. So we're going to talk about indoor air quality, building materials, furnishings, and clothing. We're going to run through this fairly quickly because I'm looking at the time here. Oops. So indoor air quality. Limit synthetic fragrance products like air fresheners and candles. You'll see here this Glade scented plug-in. Not great for indoor air quality. Also has some toxic chemicals in it. If you want, you can opt for versions that use natural essential oils, but I also like to comment here that you don't want to go overboard with essential oils. That can lead to issues as well. So, try to limit the amount of fragrance in your home. Use an air purifier, especially during wildfire smoke events, or if you live near a busy highway. And open your windows when the air is good outside to let in fresh air. Many, especially newer homes, don't have very good ventilation. So in terms of indoor air quality, these are my 3 tips. And we're going to talk about furnishings now. Couches. So couches tend to be really big, take up a big portion of the living area. Look for couches without added flame retardants. Any couch made before 2013 is likely to have them because at the time it was kind of required to like have these flame retardants in the foam, more or less. You're actually not allowed to sell couches with flame retardants in California anymore. And there must be a label under the cushions that will say whether or not there was added chemical flame retardants. Even though technically you're not allowed to buy them, I actually have in the past year or so been able to find couches that people are purchasing that are sold with flame retardants because there's just not foolproof. The regulation is just not foolproof. They're not able to check, especially if things are being imported, shipped in. So it is good to ask. For upholstery, sorry, this keeps on. Okay, there we go. For upholstery, fabrics, carpets, and rugs, avoid stain-resistant coatings or treatments. You will now see things, where like in a commercial, they'll be like, oh, we have this white couch or this, beautiful rug, and I just spilled red wine on it and it beads up. Well, the way they get that is by treating it with something that's very similar to a Teflon. And what happens, people also are very familiar with Scotch Guard or something like that. But what actually happens is that finish wears off over time, it accumulates in your dust, and then you're being exposed to PFAS chemicals. So avoid these stain-resistant coatings or treatments. Look for healthy mattresses when you're shopping. We spend a lot of time in bed, so that could be a swap that you make the next time you're shopping for a mattress. Limit vinyl or PVC products, which contain a type of chemical called phthalates. One easy thing you can do is a vinyl shower curtain, which is kind of the ones that are very clear and like stretchy. You can swap those out for a cloth one or for a PEVA, which is a healthier option. For furniture, you can find furniture now that is Green Guard certified, or look for furniture that doesn't have a lot of particle board, which is a type of wood that has a lot of like adhesives in it. Or if you get something that has a strong smelling finish or lacquer on it, it's those things will kind of off gas in your home for kind of an extended period of time. Clothing, take your shoes off at the door. I cannot emphasize how important this is. Getting a doormat and getting some slippers for you to wear in the home is just a really easy, pretty much almost free thing to do that can limit your exposure to toxic substances and chemicals. And this is because, not only may there be, small poop particles on the bottom of your shoes, but when we are out and about in the world, on sidewalks, in parking lots, we actually are coming into contact with lots of stuff that sticks onto the bottom of your shoes. And then if you then take those same shoes and you walk all around your home, you are kind of offloading some of those toxic substances and chemicals into the dust in your home, which then, as we mentioned before, you then ingest, and that's how you get exposed. So scientists at the EPA have shown that this is a real route of exposure, and it is recommended to take your shoes off at the door. Avoid stain-resistant or treated clothing as much as possible. Now I even see some commercials for like t-shirts that you can like throw some paint on and it beads up and comes off of because it's been treated. So those are, as much as possible, avoid those types of clothing items. Limit the amount of dry cleaning. So, in my house, I try to look for clothes that I can wash myself. And if there are some things that I have dry cleaned, I try to find a professional wet cleaner. San Francisco Environment has a good website where you can find professional wet cleaners in your area that can clean many of the same articles that say dry cleaning only. And wash your new clothes before you wear them. When you get something straight from the store, not only could other people have touched it and tried it on and things like that, but, many times during shipping from overseas and things like that, they, may be like fumigated and things like that. So it's just a good idea to wash your clothes before you wear them. And then I just do have a plug here about building materials. If you're remodeling, seek out safer building materials such as no VOC paints and safer flooring materials. If you have any questions, I can address that specifically. So let me look at the Q&A here. Yeah, so healthy mattresses, generally polyurethane foam, which is like a synthetic foam, tends to, especially over time, kind of pollute indoor air. So you can look for sort of natural latex foams, which tend to be healthier, and, look for sort of more natural materials, cotton, wool, things like that. Previously you could find mattresses that had flame retardants. That's less so now. Now you do find a lot of mattresses that have like vinyl coverings or like a vinyl sheet because they tout that as like a good quality for being waterproof. But, as we mentioned, vinyl does have a type of chemical called phthalates in it. So those are some examples. More and more there are, avocado mattresses is one that you can buy online that has a healthier mattress, but there are others. If you have a different price point or budget, I'm happy to answer your question more specifically about that. Yes, if you live on a busy street, try to open the window like a little bit, and you should keep your air filter on. I'd probably say, especially when you're sleeping or if you are spending all day at home, is not as in terms of like saving energy and things like that. Try to keep the air filter on when you're there. What about wearing clothing or shoes that are manufactured and marketed as plastic recycled? So there's not a ton of science about recycled plastic clothing. Most of that recycled plastics tends to be like kind of like former water bottles, and those kind of have less additives. There is some concern that in the recycling, some plastics do have these toxic additives, and when they're recycled, they tend to, show up on clothing or shoes. But it's not something that I have necessarily heard as being like a really important source of exposure. Do we need to wipe our dogs down before we let them in the house? That's up to you. Of course, dogs are very dirty and their paws, touch everything. You could give them a quick wipe down, or you could just do some of the other practices that we talked about, like vacuuming and mopping. Okay.
Dr. Wang, there's one question that was submitted earlier in the chat around do we still need to boil water that is in a Brita water filter? Is that recommended?
It depends on where you are. If you think that you have a source of bacterial contamination, like if you're camping or if you're on a well and you haven't had it tested, then that's when you would be recommended to boil your water. But generally, like if you're in San Francisco, you do not need to boil your water at all, whether or not you use a filter or not. Yes, alcohol, basically about the same strength as a hand sanitizer, or about 70%, is safe to use for wiping down electronics. I actually think that's what the CDC recommends. That being said, that's more about disinfecting your cell phone. If you want to just give it like a clean with like a wet washcloth with like a little bit of all-purpose cleaner, you're actually like taking away a lot of the germs. So, that's kind of up to you. If you just want to like give it a clean, that will actually get rid of most of the germs. Or if you want to take it to the next level, you can disinfect. Okay, let's wrap up soon with the bathroom. So personal care products. These are things like shampoo, shaving cream, conditioners, soaps, lotions, toothpaste. Many times people are like, oh, I don't use that many personal care products. But when you list out the amount of different products that your body comes into contact with, it can be quite a lot. So I like to say that you can switch to non-toxic or green beauty products when possible. Start easy, start with one thing though. Don't throw everything out all at once. It's just too overwhelming. Products without fragrances are, as an ingredient, if you look on the ingredients and it says fragrance or perfume, it's usually a good rule of thumb to not buy products with fragrances ingredient. It's mostly because companies have been using fragrance and, sticking a lot of toxic chemicals under that ingredient name. So that's one thing you can easily look for is no fragrance. I'll talk about this in a second. There are a couple of retailers or other options that have brands that have safer options. Sunscreens are an area. Look for mineral sunscreens that don't contain harmful chemicals. Right now, they're actually reviewing some of these chemicals that are non-mineral sunscreens, because they've now shown that it soaks into your skin and they can find these chemicals in your blood. We haven't come to the end of basically what that does, but generally we look for mineral sunscreens, and that is a safer alternative. So this is true for cosmetics and for personal care products. Shop for retailers and brands that screen ingredients. Target actually has kind of a clean line. If you shop online at Target, you can actually filter so that it's Target clean. If you go in person, they have little tags that say Target clean. Sephora also has something called Clean. Oh, it's not Clean and Sephora. I should say Clean at Sephora, both online and in person. There is a beauty retailer called Credo Beauty that has a store in San Francisco. They screen Detox Market. These are some retailers that I have recommended. Think of nail polish as more of a special occasion product. You can shop for safer nail polishes and bring them to nail salons. SF Environment also has a website where they have a list of healthy nail salons within San Francisco itself. And then I'll just wrap up here with outside around the home. So in the garden and around your home and even inside the home, try to avoid pesticides that are sprayed, especially. Many of these will say, oh, within 2 hours, it's all gone. But like that, in reality, that's just not true. So, pesticide residues are found after some of the claimed time periods. Rodent and insect bait traps, like the little kind of homes where they go in and like find something, and bring it back to the nest or something like that. Those are preferable to sprays. There are a lot of non-pesticide ways to get rid of weeds. I'm sure you've all seen some of the news articles about glyphosate, Roundup. So try to explore other non-pesticide ways of getting rid of weeds. If you are growing food, test your soil for lead. If you're growing food outside in a garden, or add new soil to a raised bed. Much of this is because, back in the day when we had lead paint, a lot of, especially in cities like San Francisco, you have older buildings, they were all painted with lead paint, and some of that chips away and has contaminated the soil. Also, leaded gasoline particulates have contaminated a lot of soil. So the rule of thumb is you can get your soil tested very easily. There's a lot of kits. You can even get them online, or I think sometimes even at Home Depot, you can get them. And you might have to send a soil sample to an address, or just add new soil to a raised bed. Last slide here. There's a lot of other places that can have toxic chemicals, such as airplanes and in gyms. Airplanes have a lot of flame retardants. Gyms, there's always a lot of disinfection and cleaning products and things like that. A lot of gym materials, phthalates, things like that. So always wash your hands before eating, when flying, or after gym class. So that's always a good idea. Receipts. So receipts, the thermal receipts, they are coated in something that is in the bisphenol family. It kind of depends which one, but it's something like BPA. And they have actually shown that even touching receipt, because it's coated and it comes off so easily, you do absorb it from receipt paper. So just say no, thank you, or just opt for an electronic receipt nowadays. And lastly, if you have pets, choose flea and tick treatments that aren't topical, especially like those old flea collars or those treatments where you put drops. They are actually pesticides, and when you're snuggling with your pets, you can accidentally be exposed to the pesticides that way. So you can ask your vet for non-topical options. And lastly, before I get into the rest of the Q&A, stay informed, curious, and ask questions. Talk to your friends and family about this issue. If these kind of issues matter, like ask your elected members, ask retailers, manufacturers, ask your county and city about their schools and parks. Do they spray pesticides? What kind of rodent traps are they using? What kind of foodware does your favorite takeout container, does your favorite restaurant use? These kind of questions, taking action at a community level, are really important too. And I will leave you with a bunch of these resources that will be mailed out to you, where you can find more about these things. And I'll also provide my email so you can ask me questions. So with that, I will, check in the Q&A. Personal care laundry question. Tide free and clear tends to be for cloth diapers. And often disinfect the cloth diapers in the washer. There are other laundry detergent powders that are very good for cloth diapers as well. I can send some of them to you. I use one called BioClean. It's a powder, super effective, and you can use it on cloth diapering. And I will tell you that the disinfecting of the cloth diaper and washer actually doesn't come from the detergent itself. What the detergent is doing is it is washing away any of the germs into the water. It's loosening it from that and washing it away. So Tide Free and Clear isn't a disinfectant per se, in the same way as those disinfectants that we talked about that actually kill the germs. Yes, EWG is great for checking cosmetics, sunscreen, shampoos, etc. Some people find it a little overwhelming because all of a sudden you're faced with 800 different shampoos. If you look on my website, becausehealth.org, you can search for those things where we kind of limit it to about 8 to 10 options. We have sunscreen, shampoo, dish soap, you name it. So that's also a great resource, becausehealth.org. Cutting boards, plastic, yes. Using a wood cutting board is preferable to using plastic cutting board. Not only are you, potentially especially once you're cutting the cutting board and it starts kind of fraying on the top, not only are you potentially eating small bits of that plastic with any food that you prep on a plastic cutting board, but they've actually shown that wood cutting boards are more naturally bacterially resistant than plastic. And so if you do a wood cutting board and you wash it and then put it on its side and dry it properly, they actually are recommended over plastic cutting boards. Veggie plastic bags, like the bags that you use at the grocery store to, let's say, put your lettuce in or things like that. So that tends to be a safer plastic. So I wouldn't really worry about that as a leaching source, especially since it's you're putting kind of a vegetable in it and may not store it in there for very long. However, there is also the waste issue of plastic, and those being not really recyclable and just being kind of a source of plastic pollution, which in the grand scheme of things does impact our health. You can find cloth bags that you can put vegetables in. And I actually find that the cloth bags, because they kind of absorb a little of the moisture in the fridge, tend to keep produce fresh for longer. So you can look for those cloth bags. Let's see. Dryer sheets for clothing safe. Okay. In most cases, dryer sheets have a lot of fragrances, and they actually have other kind of chemicals on them to sort of give it the static protection kind of properties. So yeah, dryer sheets have been shown to be an issue, not only for the clothes, but actually for indoor air quality, because as the dryer is going, a lot of, it's releasing a lot into the air itself in your laundry closet or wherever in your home. A great thing that I have gotten really into are these wool dryer balls. You can buy those on Amazon. You can buy them at Target. And they're just like a white ball of wool. And they you put those in the dryer at the same time. And they you go around and they do the same thing of kind of fabric softening, because they're kind of pinging around in there. And they also help with static. And they actually make your dryer work faster. So that's also good for energy savings. How do you prevent cracks in the cast iron when cooking and washing, as cracks may store germs? Any advice? Okay. Yeah, usually the cracks happen when there's a rapid change in temperature. So it's really, really hot. You just seared a chicken breast or something, and then all of a sudden you just stick it under cold water. That's usually when that kind of stuff happens. So, the preference is for you to wait for it to cool down before you wash it. And yeah, in terms of taking care of cast iron or carbon steel, you can buy these kind of they almost look like chainmail, like cast iron chainmail, or kind of a stiff bristle to kind of wash kind of residues off the cast iron. If it's a cast iron that you've had for a long time, you can use a little bit of dish soap. I do on mine. If it's a newer one, you might want to lay off on the soap for a little bit until the nonstick coating forms. And then you're supposed to dry the pan thoroughly. And if it looks like it needs a little bit of, it's really, really dry, or you're storing it for a long time, you can put a little bit of oil to kind of keep that surface. Okay. Are freezer bags safe? Generally, the type of plastic that is used in freezer bags, let's say like, your Ziploc freezer bag, is a safer plastic. That being said, I think the same thing about heat applies. Like, I wouldn't pour a hot dish into a freezer bag to put it in the freezer. I would wait until that is room temperature or refrigerator temperature, put it in the freezer bag, and then put it in the freezer. And I would not, let's say you put a chicken breast in a freezer bag, I wouldn't submerge that into hot water to help defrost it. I would not do that. But in terms of, and I wouldn't microwave whatever you have in the freezer bag as well. But in terms of using it in the freezer and that type of plastic, it is fairly safe. Yeah. I make smoothies every day with a plastic Vitamix. Okay, yes, the plastic in the Vitamix is not an ideal plastic. It's a hard, clear plastic. But generally, when you're talking about smoothie, that's something that's cold. It's only in there for a couple minutes while you whirl it up, and then you pour it out of there. So I wouldn't say that that's a huge concern in terms of exposure. In terms of leaching, I wouldn't say that's a huge concern. They do make a stainless steel Vitamix container. I haven't used it myself personally, but I do know that they do make one. Let's see, something in the chat. Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wang, for that. That was so much information, and I'm so glad we're recording this because I know that I was trying to take notes frantically, but I know I missed a lot of what you said. And thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for sharing all that knowledge you have. I mean, it's obvious you have so much more as well that we don't have time for. And I think you are going to be able to stay with us for a little while anyway, for 10 minutes after the show. And so those of you who would like to join us after the show, please do so. We're going to invite you videos on, and we'll do that in just a moment. And for those of you that are leaving us now, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you spending your time with us and learning with us in this wonderful supportive community and with Dr. Wang. And thank you, Dr. Wang, again for being with us and so generously giving us your time and wisdom. Thank you.